just to say hello and welcome. I'm Andrew Stuck. I'm one of the co-producers of Walk, Listen, Create. I'm the guy who invented something called Soundwalk Sunday. I invented it 7 years ago. And after we had quite long-winded sort of discussions with the British Library, and they admitted that none of their staff would work on a Sunday, we sort of changed the name of it to Soundwalk September, and we started developing an awards process about 4 years ago, because what we want to do was not just celebrate Soundwalks, but actually say something about the creators and get the creators and give them a chance to win an accolade. And at the beginning, we didn't have much money, so the prize money was pretty modest. But just to give you an idea, the prize money is now 500 euros this year. So if you have a Soundwalk up your sleeve and you haven't submitted it, then you really must submit it before the end of the month. That's the deadline, is the end of the month. And there's 500 euros up for grabs. And how the prize money is generated is actually through our community. So members, people who support us, pay an annual subscription, and the more annual subscriptions there are, the more money we offer in prize money. We also have an online jury recruited from our community. So they're peer judged, if that's the right way of describing it. And what we have here is we have two award winners from 2023. So I'm going to introduce you to Dawn Matheson and Ed Coulson. And I'm going to introduce Dawn first. So Dawn Matheson's art is about relationships. She's a Canada-based multimedia artist with a socially engaged practice specializing in video and audio art, installed, broadcast, and performed in public spaces. Her work can be found at festivals, galleries, museums, in national publications, and on broadcast stations, but lives best in forests, train stations, fountains, barns, and alleyways in your neighborhood. Through inclusive artistic practices, Dawn seeks to interrupt civic and social spaces with unexpected moments of beauty, curiosity, and joy. Her relational interventions hope to offer liberation from everyday suffering and to dismantle barriers between individuals by creating alternative stories that build compassion and kinship. And Ed, he says simply that he's a producer and trainer in community media, radio, podcasting, and geolocated audio with a background in communications and teaching in the outdoors, teaching and the outdoors. Originally from Scotland, he says he's very lucky to live and work in Joyce country in the west of Ireland. So both of you, welcome, and thanks very much for coming along and giving us all an opportunity to find out about how and why you came to make the work you did. So
hi everybody. Wow, this is a nice big group. I got on an hour early because I'm in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, so Eastern Standard Time. And I got it mixed up the timing, but boy, so I don't have anyone else with me, even though this is quite a large collaborative project. But 1 o'clock, a lot of the artists and students have classes or day jobs, so you just get me. So I'll try to speak for the team. This is my initiative, and as Andrew already said, the things I would probably say about my work, I guess, is that I've always worked in collaboration and in relationship. I have degrees in theater, but I ended up working in radio, CBC Radio, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation Radio, and it was radio documentary. So at the heart, I'm a real kind of live documentary sound person, and that's what really grabs me more over studio. I'm not a big studio person, even though I do all my editing in studio, but I like to capture live sound. So I tried to build the pieces mostly out of recordings in the field, which I was advised against originally. Oh, no, you got to get people in the studio. It just doesn't work in the field, but it just didn't have that live feel. I really have moved away from theater and performance. I like almost everything to be non-scripted. So that's how my work began. And in the past, I've always partnered with different populations that potentially don't have as much access to telling story that I do. And so I've always collaborated mostly through national and provincial grants, arts grants. So very low money, but pretty good stuff. So I've collaborated with a lot of marginalized populations. And during COVID, I decided to collaborate with a population that I'd never worked with, but that had been a great inspiration for my work, and that was trees. So I was kind of able to bring together some things that I've always loved. One, I have a technical practice in audio recording and video. I work in video a lot as well. And two, I love to walk. I've always been a walker, a long distance walker, and that's where I kind of gather stories and then, come back home and create work from them. And then lastly, trees. I grew up early years in British Columbia, West Coast, so I had a lot of connection with trees, and that's kind of where I've always managed my own creativity, which is highly linked to my own wellness. So long story to say that this project I called How to Draw a Tree, which is a 3-year project. So it's a larger themed project. And it was all about just experimenting to see if we could actually, in a real genuine way, co-create and connect with a tree and include that tree in the creation process and also in somewhat of a wellness project. And I did the first sound walk, which I submitted, I guess, 2 years ago for the September Sound Walk September. And that's the one, obviously, I'm the most intimate with. I usually don't put myself in my own work, but because I was asking people who lived with mental illness to create and do this experiment with me, where you spend a year with a digital recorder, you're walking in the forest, a specific forest, an arboretum attached to our academic institution here at the university, who partnered with me. And you're really just trying to stop your brain and use your, I guess, somatic, you use your body, your intuition, your spirit, or whatever it might be, to connect with a tree. So I did the first one, and then once it actually worked, I ended up inviting 3 students who have all had, quite severe mental illness to join this project. And I'll just mention that it's originally I wanted it to be just me and trees because I was so sick of humans. I didn't want to work with any more people. I was like, I'm just going to work by myself, but inevitably, I met a whole bunch of fantastic people who are connected to trees. This project ended up being about trees and their relations, which of course were insects and birds and wind and the elements, and then people. So there's a ton of people that join me, and they're called the Tree Team, and they're very diverse. We have an Indigenous elder, a person who lives rough and is an animal tracker. We have a horticulturist, the head horticulturist at the Arboretum. I have a eco-psychologist. We had a birder. We had an African man who worked on a plantation in Kenya, who is now the tree planter for the university. And they all became the Tree Team. So each of these people were available to walk with each of the 3 students. We had 4 students originally, and one did terminate the project due to some pretty severe mental illness that got, of course, this is all part of this process, became too much to continue the project, but that was equally the work. Even though there's no product, it was very process oriented. So the one that we're going to talk about today is with a fantastic guy named Abaraj Dadina. I met him because one of my friends is a poetry professor, and he's an international business student from India living in Canada. And his parents think he's only doing business, but he's really doing poetry. And he's a really funny guy. He's had some very serious losses in his life in India, and was very unfamiliar with the forest, and ended up really wanting to do this project to really talk about how the nature in Canada and the trees helped him save his own life. So his project is probably the most interactive in that everything he experienced in his walk, he invites the listener to experience as well, through imagination, through touch, through humor, and through writing of poetry. So his walk is the one that was selected as runner-up last year. So the last thing I'll just mention is that I don't think she's going to be able to get on today, but this walk is site-specific, but I don't think any of you will ever be able to access it unless you come to Canada. So we created a website with another partner of mine. She's a visual artist, and she made a beautiful site. She's never done sound walks. We didn't use a particular app. She built one and created it with her drone photography, her artwork, and a map that is interactive online. So that's how it lives now, as it's no longer live in the forest. So that was a long intro, but that's the work. Over to you, Ed.
Hey, thanks, Dawn. Um, okay, so it blows my mind, first of all, that I'm actually here talking about a walk that I've even made, let alone that was like that did well. So it really, but I have to say that the fact that I'm here doing that is in very large part to do, and I'm absolutely delighted that there's three people on this call to whom I can trace that the origin of that actually happening in totally different ways. So Eilish and Esther, who are on the call, are part of Headford Lace project, and they commissioned me to make this walk. And that just doesn't really cover what they did. Like they've just been unbelievably supportive people in many ways. Long before this walk even existed or was thought of, they helped me to make a radio documentary about the group. And for those of you who don't know anything about Headford Lace, all I want to tell you is that it's an amazing story. It's something that kind of started in 2016 with just a tiny fragment of fabric, a tiny little, very fragile piece of white fabric, of lace, that just kind of people got curious about. People like Esther and Eilish got curious about and decided to work out, what's this all about? It comes from and it came from their town, and they knew that there had been a lace industry in the town, but that it was very unknown about, almost forgotten. And that kicked off this amazing process of sort of like exploration and discovery. And maybe they'll be able to talk a little bit better, a little bit more and a little bit better than I can about that. But like they spoke to me for a documentary, and I made and other people as well spoke to me for a documentary that I made, and then that kind of created our relationship. And then when they decided that they wanted to do an audio guide, that's when we got talking about it, and that's how it happened. And the other person who's on this call, who's very, very important to my journey into Soundwalks, is Kathy. Kathy Fitzgerald is like, I can trace my interest in Soundwalks almost to a single moment, and that moment is one that Kathy had a hand in making. And it's this audio walk that she mentioned, and Stranger Kilfinnan, which existed in a small village in Ireland, which for a while at least, and maybe even still, has been regarded as a bit of a sort of audio capital, because so many interesting audio things happen there, including a festival. And the moment that really got me, there was two really. I was on this sound walk listening to this piece, and there's two things that always come back to me. The first one was where I was walking around this village listening to these headphones, and suddenly there was a man talking, and we were outside the church. I was outside the church all on my own with my headphones on, and there was a man talking in my ear and saying, "Come on inside the church," and then telling me exactly which pew to go and sit in, so that I was sitting right in front of his favorite stained glass window. And then he told you a story about why he found this stained glass window so meaningful for him. And like just that thing of like being directed by somebody who wasn't there but then was there, and then being led and being surprised, and it just opened my ears to what was possible. And then later on in the same walk, coming back up towards the high street, standing outside the butcher's shop and hearing the butcher telling a story about a horrendous injury that happened, and him describing the scene of luckily being saved by luck, actually, by the presence of a doctor, if I remember correctly. But standing outside the butcher shop with this scene of like carnage being described right in front of you on this empty street, and that was Kathy's work. And so I hope that we'll have a chance to like hear a little bit from Kathy about like her approach and philosophy to like stories that are told within that are designed to be told within a specific place. Like that would be really cool if we can hopefully come to you, Kathy, and talk to you a little bit. Headford Lace Trail is a geolocated trail that ties together present day kind of documentary style interviews with a kind of a little bit of time travel and some drama to bring to life the lives of people who were making lace in Headford in the 19th century. And along the way, we try to get across some historical facts, but maybe not too many. We try to keep it kind of Eilish is nodding. I think that's enough of an introduction. I hope I've conveyed something of like how happy I am to have been supported and inspired by the people who like helped me to make this thing, you know. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, well, I'd like to pitch in and say, obviously, I really enjoyed both your pieces. I wasn't one of the jurors, so I sort of came to it as someone who wasn't judging you or making establishing whether you were on a kind of level or whatever. But what I thought was really fascinating by yours, Ed, was this conceit you made, whereby we're sort of listening to someone who is trying to make their Soundwalk audio trail app work. And I thought that was kind of, that was tongue in cheek, but also a little bit of perhaps, I don't know, is there a little bit of history there for you in there? Would how easy was it to use? You chose Sonic Maps as your geolocated platform, but how easy was it for you to actually technically make what you did, which is a cross between drama, documentary, heritage. I mean, and was it heavily scripted? It was heavily scripted. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we wrote out the whole thing basically. Yeah, it was completely scripted. There was a lot of work went into the script. And for the sort of present day kind of documentary style interviews, we scripted roughly what we wanted or hoped or expected that they would say. And then kind of when we actually did the interviews, we took what we had and kind of, tried to aim towards what we'd wanted, or sometimes they said things which were far better than what we'd imagined, of course. So we used those instead. It was very hard and very tricky. That bit about that conceit you talked about, where at the beginning of the walk you meet a woman who is trying to do the audio walk. So you're sort of both in the same boat, and it was a little bit of an inside joke because, like, as I don't know, anybody who's made audio walks know, like, it's not a foolproof technology yet. There's often little hiccups and things like that. So I suppose it was a little bit of an inside joke, maybe, or maybe a kind of an admission that, like, things don't always necessarily work that perfectly with these walks. Maybe that's what I was thinking. trying to get the listener to give us some leeway, maybe. I don't know. Maybe Eilish or Esther can talk about the scripting of it. I don't know. I'm just like really keen to hear from those others who might be able to say something about it.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah, far away.
Well, first of all, just to say that there was a point early in the process where we were getting knocked back by funders and had all these various pressures going, could you not just make a plain ordinary audio guide? And when I was wavering, Ed told the story that he just told about the man telling him to go into the church, which is why the thing got made, because he then persuaded me. And so thank you, Kathy. It's interesting to meet that person. In terms of the script, Ed is using we a lot there. He shouldn't be. He should be using I. He wrote most of the script. We had this issue where not issue, but challenge where we wanted to use some of the contemporary voices, but we also wanted to give voice to the lace makers of 150 years ago, and how to do that. And the technicals of how to do that were something that we wrangled with for quite a bit before we came up with this slightly zany time travel piece, which I think actually works. I was very involved in the actual making and recording. Some of it happened here, some of it is me. And even still, like, there's one of the actors who like sat in my kitchen and had tea, and I was at the start of the walk going, well, I must listen out for her and see. Got to the end of the walk and went, where was she? And it was so well done that I had forgotten that it was an actor in the thing that I had made and read the script and everything. So I do think we managed to bridge that quite well. I don't know if that's a helpful contribution, but
no, that's great. That's great. Well, because this is in complete contrast to you, Dawn. From what you're saying is you've actually abandoned scripting and so tell us a little bit about how did you put together what you put together and how you chose what you chose, because you were actually the commissioner almost in this. You were the overall producer.
Yeah, that's right. And that's funny. I love hearing this story because that might be more the model that funders go for, where I've always worked, often in collaboration with populations. And since I'm sometimes more of a dominant voice, I can never determine what the outcome will be. I can't say, well, this is what the piece is going to be. It's going to sound like this. It's going to be using these mediums. Because whenever I partner, it's always all about the process. And I never know what the product will be, the art piece will be, until we've collected and gone through the process. So I'm really comfortable with improv, chance, you know, just not knowing what's going to happen. I'm not very good with structure, you know, management of what's going to happen, of, you know, what a piece will look like. So because this really was 1 year of gathering audio, it was really long. We wanted to have the different seasons. I'm so used, as a radio editor, audio editor, I'm so used to having to sift through hundreds of hours of audio, which is very unproductive and not a very good financial move. But that's how I work. Until I sit there and hear it all, I don't even know what the story's going to be. And that's how I've always worked. I wish I worked the other way, because this is a very long, slow process, but I never have. And it's certainly not when I'm working with marginalized populations. I don't want to come and say, this is what you're going to say, and your piece is going to be about this. You know, I can't do it. So I don't know how to do it even with trees. And funny, even collaborating with trees, I felt like, do I have a right to tell a tree story? Like, how do I ask their permission to create this work? So mostly this piece was about me shutting up, getting out of the way, and then trying to just let the story come. And so mine was, yes, very much the opposite. And each of these three pieces are very, very different. Like Abarage's was long and meandering and complicated and all over the place and hard to follow. And another one, Geordie, he is not someone who moves his body very much. He wanted to mostly sit on benches and did not want to leave one safe space. And then the third individual, she's a professional singer, and she could only wanted to relate to the trees through singing. So she insisted on having, wonderfully enough, other musicians meet her at the trees so she could connect. So I didn't know that piece was going to happen. And I'm not a musician. So I ended up hiring a composer to help me with her music, because I was like, what am I going to do now? I can't go and, you know, so it's all, I have no idea what the piece will be like until it's done. So yeah, neat to hear the rest.
For both of you, yeah, what you keep in and what you leave out. You know, how do you, you know, how do you choose those moments that you think are going to maintain the listener? And that's the other thing, is how much is your audio maintaining the listener, and how much is your, you know, where you've placed them, or where they're listening to it. So there's sort of two sides to this. First of all is, you know, how do you choose what you're going to keep in, and how do you, you know, reject the other bits? And then how do you balance what the listener might experience in situ, which is around them, while they're listening to your audio? Is that fair questions to ask?
I totally identified with what Dawn was saying about not scripting and then listening back to what people say. For me, how to pick it? Well, I mean, you do have to have at least a skeleton plan of where something's going generally. You know, just a rough outline. So there's some things that maybe will be so off topic that people have said are not that interesting. They're easy to leave out. But once you've eliminated that, how do I pick it? It just really resonates in the heart space and in my ears. When I hear it, I just know. I don't know if you can teach this, or if it's just an intuitive thing combined with experience. But I just hear something and I almost tear up, because it's that kind of poignant, or such a great description, or just has some sort of charge, emotional charge, or sound, sonic charge to it. So that's how I pick. I don't do it very, which is odd, having come from a scientific background, but I don't do it terribly logically at all. This is not an exact sound walk, but I was making this piece last year for BBC called Obsessed with the Quest. And this woman, she'd given a great interview about her chimpanzee research. But then right near the end, I happened to mention what weather was like in the forest. And she started describing big thunderstorms and how chimpanzees rain dance. And it's just like the minute she started describing it, it's like, I don't care what I have to do. This has to go in. And I want it near the end, because there was some kind of difficult stuff in the middle of the piece where one chimp had killed another. And it's like, I don't want to end on that. And the minute I heard her talking about rain dancing chimpanzees, it's like, whoa, whoa, you know, it just throbbed. So that's my 10 cents of how I choose things. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Dawn, do you want to chip in and say how you chose the bits you did? I mean, if you've been listening to, you know, year-long audio diaries, I mean, were your collaborators, you know, were they spending literally hundreds of hours talking into their smartphones? I mean, you know, how was it, or, you know, how did it work out?
Yeah, yeah. I missed some of your question because my dog went maniac here, but I think I've got, I certainly identify with D. Yes, I also have, you know, it's a skill because I've worked in audio and story editing for 20 years now. So yes, I can sit there and, you know, everybody knows the expressions of kill your babies. Like, it's like there's 1,000 different directions to go and you have a ton of tape. And you're like, which is the one that resonates the most? But because I'm doing it in collaboration, yes, Abaraj did sit with me quite a bit. I did send him a lot of cuts I thought were great, and he would send me some he thought were great. But he didn't have the same skill level, in the sense that, and I just mean that in that he you know, he will always be the one who decides what goes in the piece, but he couldn't hear where story connected, I guess, if I'll just say it like that. And basically, it's just a practical thing you learn, and I'm sure all of you have it already. Yeah, and then you find a theme. And for him, it was, what was the most important thing for him that he kept saying over and over, and that was that he nearly extinguished his own light, so now he wants to be a lamplighter for others. So I thought, okay, where is he doing that work? Like, I didn't want this to be depressing work. It could have been a piece where everyone is talking about why they want to end their life, and it was that piece in many ways. But this was not about that. It was about, how did you make it through that? And so for him, it was how he's always saying, see what I'm doing? Now you try this. So it helped me out quite a bit, because other times when he was off talking about philosophers or all these things that were unrelated to what was in front of him, I didn't include any of that. So I did get a narrative line with his quite quickly. It helps you get rid of all the other stuff, you know.
And Ed, you were running workshops, or the Headford Lace Heritage Group were running the workshops, and through that you worked out who you were going to kind of interview. I mean, you know, and then you interviewed them, and what, you then shaped the script from that. How did the scripting kind of work?
So Eilish and Esther can jump in if I start going wrong on this, but so they already had an in-person tour that they were doing as a group. They would get visitors to the town and sort of lead them through the town, and there were certain points of interest, and occasionally there were people who would join to contribute certain things. So they might, you know, for example, the first sort of interview, I guess, that you hear on the walk is with a woman called Teresa, who lives on a street that of houses that was built to house lace makers, basically. Or the families included lace makers, and so and she had previously contributed. So to the in-person walks that the group was doing, and I guess like others as well, other voices that you hear are similar in that sense. So I guess that's how we sort of picked them. We knew that they already had sort of something that would contribute from a sort of maybe a sort of a factual or a kind of a to describe the historical scene, what it would have been like, but we didn't, and we kind of know we knew what we thought that they would be good for, right? But very often they like I said, they would say something in a way, or they'd say something totally different that you just think, yeah, that's got to go in. Like, for example, you hear from this guy Pat Monaghan, who's the metal worker who made this sculpture that's a lace-related sculpture in the center of the town, and I can't actually remember. I mean, we scripted him. We imagined that he would talk about the construction of the sculpture and talk about it. That was kind of it, right? But then when I went to speak to him, he, for some reason, sort of asked him, what does he think when he goes past the sculpture now, or something like that, you know? And he started talking about the ways in which he sees people using it. So he says that he's seen like 2 lads playing volleyball across the top of it, or he's noticed that like people use it as a meeting point to be collected. You know, I'll meet you at the heart sculpture. You know, or like he's seen it used as a focal point for when there's people are mourning tragedies, or you know, kind of national tragedies and things. So like that wasn't in the script, but I don't know. I don't feel like I've got a particularly good nose for this stuff. I'm a complete beginner. This is like the first sort of major audio walk that I've made. I've only made 1 or 2 sort of things for the radio, a couple of big projects and a few small ones, and I'm definitely a beginner at this. So I really don't know. Eilish's got her hand up, and then and then after, I don't know. Maybe I'd love to, just very selfishly, I would love to hear Kathy talking also about what just how to pick things or not pick things. But yeah, Eilish, you had your hand up, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I was just going to come in on, you know, those were the contemporary people, but then more in terms of the contrast between the 2 walks is so profound. It's amazing. With the historical people, we have a historian on our committee, and she's incredibly rigorous. So Ed is saying we got a couple of historical facts in there. Every single thing, the accents, the tone, the background noises, everything is historically spot on, because she was really, really rigorous about that. And so one of the things that had to be chosen was actual characters from our history that we have put together, who would have been alive at the time, who would have been approximately that age at the time. We can only talk about the experiences that they had had at the time. So, for example, this woman, Honor Melia, is the first lace maker that is met. And obviously that was all scripted because we don't know what she would have said. But it was her talking about stuff that she, you know, her life at the time, which was the way to get those historical facts across. As a project, what we didn't want, because I hate them, is the kind of audio tour where you're going, and on your right you will see a grey house and it's lovely and grey, and we just wanted to do something different. And I just want to refer back to Dawn's point about the funding, that, you know, I'd love to know how you get your stuff funded. We had awful trouble getting this funded, and we sort of initially went to kind of the most likely funder, and they completely just went, no, it's too out there, we don't know what you're talking about, go away. And we then went to our local arts office, who know us because we have an established relationship over several years, and in essence they kind of went, look, we don't really know what you're talking about, but we know you'll do a good job. We know Ed will do a good job, away you go. And they're all delighted. And to be honest, things like the recognition from Soundwalk September has hugely helped in terms of the uptake here, in terms of now if somebody else wanted to get one, they can go, you know, like the thing in Headford, and people will go, oh yeah, I know what that is. So it's hopefully this kind of ripple effect is going to happen, because that would be great.
No, that's terrific. Thank you. And what, shall we get Kathy? Kathy, are you prepared to say something?
Yeah.
Ed keeps wanting you to, so perhaps you better.
I know. I feel Ed is being extremely modest. I have to say, I feel a little bit kind of like we have to keep pushing it back onto Ed, because actually, you know, you're the guy who made the piece, and you know, I'd actually just love to hear about the making. But yeah, so I think a little way back, the question was about choosing, and I think so much of it is instinctive, but I think it's about maybe nowness. It's like when I'm listening, you know, there will be just that moment when suddenly, you know, I'm 100% listening, and it's that and you just know you are completely present, because whatever is happening on the tape is just, that's it. And often it's surprise. I don't mean like a, whoa, somebody's jumped out at me. I just mean that somebody I'm listening to has been sort of more or different, or, you know, some turn of phrase has just, you know, yeah. So it's all of that really, but it is so much gut instinct. It's funny, I'm only thinking about it because Neil Sandell, another Canadian maker, asked me this question this week, and we were both saying it's impossible. It's such a big and complicated question. It's so instinctive. Yeah.
Okay, Esther. Esther has put in something. Esther, do you want to say what you put in the chat, or are you happy just to leave it in the chat?
No, I agree first off that Ed is being extremely modest, because we knew from the previous documentaries he had done, not just for us, but there was another documentary he did at an early stage where he just happened upon something that was happening in Headford. It was a kind of an apple festival, and he did a very short little piece where he interviewed people who were attending that event. And you know, it wasn't just a kind of an information piece. He really captured the mood of the day. It was a really uplifting day, and there were lots of participants, and it was a real community day out. There were children, there was singing, there was music, there was poetry, there were apples, certainly, and there was, you know, apple juice and cider and heritage apples, loads of varieties on show and all of that. And he just wandered around for the day and did this short little documentary about the event. I think that was the first thing we heard that Ed had done. And then that led us to talking to him again and doing the documentary about Headford Lace at a later stage, and then the soundboard. So we knew we were in good hands, that he would very much capture the emotion that we all felt around the fact that our town once had this, you know, lively industry of lace making, and that it was a history that was largely forgotten. And you know, in Ireland, there's lots of different centres that make lace, but Headford was one that had been left out of a lot of historical records. So anything we do in our project is trying to just, I suppose, put Headford back on the map in terms of lace making, but it's also creating this new sense of pride in the town. People who have lived in the town all their lives, maybe even for generations, a lot of those had largely forgotten this history. So for them to hear this particular audio tour and to hear the history brought to life for them is very moving and emotional. So, you know, we kind of knew that Ed was going to get that emotion across for us. We didn't know how he was going to do it. We just knew he would. And that's what he does very well. He just knows which pieces to pick and which pieces to leave out. It just works.
Okay, well, I've got a really good question coming up from Biorko in the chat, but what I'm just gonna, because my question had two bits in it, and neither of you have answered the second bit yet, so I'm going to get Ed and Dawn to sort of think about it. I mean, you know, clearly I've had to listen to your pieces quite remotely from where they actually take place. Okay, so what I'm kind of interested in was how much of your producing of the work, how much of the actual story that's been developed, were there places within the work where you allowed the ambience of the actual place to come into the work? Do you see what I'm trying to say? And was it something that you thought about almost before you began the production? You know, I've made quite a few sound walks, and what I find is I'm one of these people that has to walk the territory a lot before I even think about doing the sound. So, you know, I was kind of interested in, you know, how clearly Headford Lace Trail is going to be taking place in Headford, and you talked about going to a street, you know, where the houses were built for the lace workers. But did you know, did people stop, and are they invited to absorb the sounds of the street now? Do you see what I'm trying to say? And Dawn, you took people who walked through this arboretum. You know, it's a very managed forest. It's not a forest at all. You know, it's a managed border of trees. Yeah, and yeah, you know, how much was it important? And quite often it's thinking about silence, isn't it? It's almost having a sound wall which has periods of silence. You don't have to fill in with anything because the ambience is providing it. I don't know. That's my kind of shtick. Okay, so either you want to try and tackle that, and then we come back to someone who's much more sensible and put a question in there in the chat.
I love that question because, you know, my piece has sort of 3 layers of sound. One is the it has the narration, which is live in the field, so the field recordings. And those field recordings obviously have a lot of stuff behind them. They have traffic, they have birds, they have children's voices, they have other people on the trail, they have footsteps, you know. And then I have all the audio that I went out and did, you know, really close eco acoustic recording where I recorded all of the, by the way, this arboretum is very large and it does have some wild old growth forest in it. So there is some unmanaged parts of this forest, there's 2 forests in it. But anyways, and because I said I was actually co-creating, I mean, again, imposing that on the trees, it was very important that the trees had a sound. So all throughout in the piece I did was this other voice, and that was the voice of the location. And so what I would do was when we walked with an ornithologist, and you know, you would hear all the birds he was pointing out, and of course at times you couldn't hear them because it was too faint. So I would go back out and I did do genuine recordings of trying to be as true. And I mean, I could have easily found sound clips online, but everything you hear is from that actual forest. I had a lot of fun mixing. I did work with a composer who did take some of the sounds that we already found and then made it into music, which is something I can't do. I'm not musical. So that was great. I provided him with a whole bunch of ambient sound. And during one of my sound walk, we have a piece where it's kind of a whole bunch of those sounds made into a cacophony of noise, because it was a bit of a piece giving an example of a manic episode. We also had someone walk who started to perform drums on a sculpture, and we recorded that, and now that became some of the transitional sounds throughout the piece, you know. And that what you're bringing up is great, because I feel like the sound of the space, including the traffic, was vital. I hated the traffic sound initially. I was trying to get as far away from it as I could, but then it ended up being a perfect voice in the narrative, which became the embodiment of the idea of mental illness, something that's always there. You can't really get rid of it, get away from it. You just have to change your relationship to it. There are birds that you like, and I wanted to get my mic up, and then there's that goddamn traffic. And wherever we went, the traffic was there. And I ended up realizing, as part of the whole process of this, is no, the traffic has a voice as well. And what's the relationship to the voice, and what's the relationship to the bird? And so it's all there. It's very important that audio is there. But the piece works online because the audio is there. That sound bed is there, and it gets louder. And it was a dilemma I had, because a lot of the times, this is going to be a difficult thing to say to sound walkers, I don't walk with headphones in the forest. Not a chance. I'm there to listen to the birds and the trees. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't listen to anything. And many of my nature friends are like, why would we want the headphones on? So a lot of the people listen to one ear in, so they would get my audio, and one ear out, because it is being in the forest. So long answer, but that was a big voice, and that was a big consideration throughout all the editing and the weaving of the sound bed. And I loved how Ed's also had a lot of different sound to delineate the different voices. That's really important to do. When was it going to be the performed archival work, the theatrical work? When was it the live interview docs? And you had some beautiful methods for that, to signal that. Like, I love I'm sorry, I don't remember like spin, twist or something, but all the ways you got us into, you can tell I don't do lace, whatever. You got us into the different, where we were. You helped us with our location, and that was really wonderful in that. And I had to do a bit of that too. Like, when is the person in the forest, and when is the narrative? And yeah, that's it.
You even said right at the beginning, Dawn, about not wanting to use studio recordings and wanting to record on location, and this is something that's been very important for me as well. I think I've always been, since a child, been very interested in the sounds that places make when you make noises in them, like the acoustics of places, basically, and like the sound signatures of places. And so that's because of my interest in that, and my appreciation of the value of that. I think I always found it a little bit sometimes jarring, not with all walks, but like I have been on sort of walks where, or not even walks, like just like bits of audio in general, that like where the place where the thing was recorded just doesn't make sense for the thing that you're listening to. And sometimes on walks it can be that like they were recorded in this like really closed down studio environment, whereas like the person is supposedly talking to you on location. And so I've always wanted to record things in the place where they're going to be listened to, if possible, but also like kind of try to. I think also it changes the way you feel about space, because I think like if you can hear sounds bouncing off like trees around you, or if you can hear them bouncing off buildings, like even if you don't know it consciously, like it's affecting how you feel about the place. And so if you can record things in a way that like matches the acoustic place that you're in, I think if you can do it, I'm not saying I can do it well, but if you can do it, I think maybe it helps to like just to get somebody into the feeling of a thing, and just helps to kind of make them feel like it's sort of real. Because part of the things that I love about Soundwalks is the way that like is the magic of them, is the idea that there's sort of like a voice, like it's disembodied, it's talking to you, but it's here, it's like it's here in this place, and it can't be listened to somewhere else, you know. Like the walk that the Headford Lace Trail is one of like kind of, I guess, like 2 complete walks that I've made. Like I've made a couple of other bits and pieces, but and both of them I've used binaural mics. And these are microphones that go in your ears. For anybody who doesn't know, like you need to just get yourself a pair of them and just try them out, because the effect that it can have, it can be quite remarkable. It does make things more complicated, but you get that sense of like, not just that things are sort of left and right, but that they're up and down and forward and backwards and things like that. It's not like necessarily always like fireworks, but sometimes it's very subtle. But that subtlety is exactly what makes different spaces unique from one to the other. And so I did use a lot of binaural for this. So I would encourage people to play with binaural recordings if you're aiming for that kind of immersion and things like that, but it does make a lot of extra work.
Anyway, she asked a question about sharing. How do you get your stuff shared? I don't know whether you want to try to answer that. Di, you also put in the chat something about using binaural mics. Do you want to say something a bit about that? Because that's a kind of technical thing.
I've used this technique ever since someone introduced it. Someone called Terence Loren introduced me to it in Shanghai, and when I was there as an artist in residence in 2015. I couldn't believe it the first time I listened back, playback. It was literally the next best thing to being there. But with those headsets, which I have used, plugged into my iPhone actually, as well as I head mount my own microphones too. But iPhone recording is kind of really handy, quick and dirty. It records what's around you great, but if you try and narrate any dialogue yourself with them actually on, I found it sounds really odd, not surprisingly. So not that you can't use them as a microphone, you just stick them on a dummy head in when you're out in the field or back in the studio, and just point the dummy head at you and do it that way. But actually having them on and then trying to record your own voice, I found not great. I don't know if anyone else has tried that and what they think.
It's you get a very weird thing if you're recording your own voice, because it's in your head. So you get that kind of inside hearing because you're hearing it, but the microphone's actually picking it up from the outside. So when you play it back with all of the things like we're talking about, bicycles going past behind you and things like that, and other bits of talk going on around you, I suppose if you're wanting to create, which I was playing with, something that had a kind of dreamy and slightly disturbing kind of feel about it, your voice, and I was sort of kind of narrating a little sequence, sort of it was me ruminating really, I guess, and then the wild sound of the location. It has a particular effect. So I've used it both ways. I've used it just me walking and listening, and also me walking, talking and listening.
I just see a comment there from Tamsin, sort of, I guess the term you're talking about is binaural. It just means like two ears, I think, something like that, maybe.
Both ears.
So both ears, right? That's all it means. Like, and it just means that there's 2 microphones involved, and they sit in your ears when you're recording. That's all it means. But the benefit that it has is that it's recording sound in exactly the way that you as a person with a human head hears sound. So all of the strange things that happen with sounds as they move around your head and your shoulders and things like that, all of that's captured by the microphones. So that's the reason why they're a little bit different from just, you know, two microphones that are on the top of your recorder a few centimeters apart, you know, pointing at 90 degrees from each other. You know, that's the difference, you know.
The dead space where the head is an important component of this. If you just had two microphones ear spaced apart with nothing in between them, you just get a kind of stereo. You actually have to have something in the middle, which is quite why it's often called a recording on a dummy head, because you can literally get a human-sized dummy head. I've got several, and stick the microphones where the ears are. Or Neumann make a very, very expensive one with the mics mounted inside where the ear canal. You can do that yourself as well. I know how, if anyone wants some coaching on how to do that. Yeah, but that it's a combination of the two microphones where your ears would be, but the fact that the sound is forced to go around your head, so that's how it replicates exactly how we hear. And so, yeah, you can. Yeah, Richard's got one there, so you can scare yourself out of your skin if you're not careful. If you walked behind the microphones or something's happened behind the microphone, the dummy head, and then you listen back, it literally sounds like someone's walking around the back of you, or like those bicyclists on that tour. Yeah, so I hope that clears up the confusion. It's nothing fancy.
Well, I was also going to chip in that Tamsin, we did a recording on the bus when we did the 108 drama with Nigel Bristow. We used a dummy head and binaural mics. It was like a hobby horse, you know. So you walk on the bus, and we're literally on the 108 bus in London, this London bus, and we're standing there holding this hobby horse with these binaural mics on it, and you'd think that people would go like, well, what the hell are they up to? But of course, no, they don't. They're in a London bus, and most of them are actually on their headphones or playing with their mobile phone. So we were able to record something like an hour and 40 minutes with binaural mics without anyone interrupting us. It was kind of weird.
The other great thing is, of course, if you're wearing microphones, you just, and they're fairly small, like I've used my DPA 4060s for this a lot. People just think you're listening to headphones. So in busy environments where there's lots of people around you and you want to be respectfully incognito, obviously you don't want to eavesdrop on people's private conversations, but you can record totally candid situations. People don't know you're recording, and this is huge, especially in busy environments.
The question that came in from Björko is like nagging at me as well, because it is even though that group of people have left the chat, it might be something that's of interest to people. And it is the question about how do you share things? How do you get people to go through the steps they have to go through to listen to these things? It's not like the radio, just turn on a knob and there it is, you know what I mean? Or, I mean, like how hard it's been to get people to start listening to podcasts, you know? This is a whole other level. And the technology is not there yet. It's not built into phones in the way that like radio and podcasts and video content are. I mean, maybe that would be a good thing. Maybe it wouldn't be if it became this kind of proprietary thing, and we'd all have to start making iPhone sound walks. I don't know if that would be a good thing, but that difficulty of like how to share it, and the fact that it's very platform dependent was an issue. Is an issue to bear in mind. Like if platforms close, there's that wonderful walk that I talked about before that Kathy made, that's not available anymore purely because the company that owned the app just stopped supporting it. It's just not there anymore. So sadly, like that's not there. Maybe it could be brought back, you know, like that would be lovely. But that's something to bear in mind. It's like if you're making these walks, you know, like have everything backed up. Don't just have them only stored on the platform, you know, and like have the details of like maybe the coordinates of where the different zones are and things like that, like any pictures and things like that. Definitely have a backup somewhere so that if the platform goes down, you know, the people can you'll have a chance to sort of resurrect it somewhere else, you know. As for sharing it, like the way we did it with the Headford Lace Trail is we have leaflets that are left around the town. And they have a QR code on them. So people can scan the QR code on the leaflet, or they can just type in the address, which is on the leaflet as well. And the leaflet also benefits us from that onboarding point of view. Like we discovered, even with Sonic Maps, Sonic Maps is an amazing platform. It's a really well-developed platform. But even with Sonic Maps, it's not a perfect technology yet, and there's lots of little things that can go wrong, especially for people who are not so confident with using their phones. So we found that the leaflet was really, really helpful to try and anticipate some of those problems. Like it kind of, you kind of don't want to have to do it in a way, because you kind of want to just kind of have this sort of magical experience where it just suddenly the sound is playing and people are immersed in a story. Sadly, it's not quite there yet. So you just got to bite the bullet and we just produce these sort of instructions that try to sort of onboard people as smoothly as possible. And in that clip that I played as well, there's also a bit of onboarding. That clip in the woods, they say things like, try not to pause the audio, and remember to put on your headphones now, that kind of thing. So like, you also have to do that kind of work and sneak it into a script or somehow to try and kind of, all of these things to try and get people sort of to the audio, you know? So I don't know. I just thought I'd mention those kind of things to bear in mind, because it's all very well making one of these things, but if people can't get to it, then what's the point? You know. Eilish, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Just because we're the original thing behind this was that we were doing all these in-person audio trails, or no, audio trails, walking tours, and we're a small volunteer group, and we just didn't have enough people or enough volunteer time. People were getting a bit burnt out with them. So the idea with this now is that they are in various locations, but largely they're in the hotel, and that in the center of the town, and the people in the hotel, if you're saying, what can I do, they will give you this and you'll go up and do whatever. And lots of people are accessing it like that. We do also have people who come to Headford specifically to learn about the lace enthusiasts, which, and I mean this very respectfully, tends to be a slightly older and less technologically able cohort. So we have on several occasions had to go down and kind of show them how to turn on the Wi-Fi or whatever it is on the phone. We've had lots of people show up with no headphones. We've had people show up with one set of headphones between 3 people. So even as we go, if we're doing another leaflet, there's things that we'll be adding to it, because there's stuff that we haven't anticipated. And you then what to do, like if you start at the hotel, you start with somebody telling you to go down that way, but actually we need you to go up there to start there, so they can tell you to walk here, because that goes past the hotel, and you miss a whole chunk, and so you don't know what's happening. And my favorite, which I haven't told Ed, was if you've listened to the beginning of the sound walk, you're listening to lovely music, and then somebody says, oh, I'm trying to get this thing to work. And somebody at that point turned it off and went, well, if she can't get it to work, I'm not going to be able to get it to work. Luckily, I was beside her to go, no, you're supposed to hear that. It's okay. So it's not without challenges. And again, I don't know what it's like. You're obviously all over the world, but here, the concept of an audio walk is just completely alien to, I would say, every single person that has done it here. So we're introducing the concept of an audio trail, as well as trying to introduce our audio trail at the same time. Just to throw in as well, again, because you're all over the world, some of you might have heard, we did have one very switched on couple who came at the very start, possibly at the very first night, who were geocachers. I've heard of geocaching, but it's like treasure hunting for grown-ups. And they suggested, and we haven't done it yet, but they suggested putting a geocache at the start of the audio trail with the information on how to do it, because there are people who travel around the world doing that. So it would be a nice way to maybe link up a bunch and get people doing it that way. We haven't done it yet, but it's on the list.
No, I think that sounds like an intriguing idea. Dawn, do you want to chip in something? I'd really like to ask a question that sort of follows on about this, because I'm a podcaster and I know all about the issues about discoverability. But we've got 2 or 3 people who make a lot of work for radio. And I'm kind of interested in why you think radio has managed to, embrace podcasting and vice versa. Could we not get podcasting to embrace sound walking more? I mean, millions of people are listening to podcasts now. But Dawn, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we had a lot of challenges with this, Rochelle and myself, because we had one sign at the outset of the Arboretum. It's a student entrance. And, every student has a cell phone and earbuds, and most of them have Wi-Fi. So we thought, great. We were worried, about accessibility. Our walk cannot be accessed if you don't have data. And I'm worried doesn't have data. So it was problematic. So we had to do a lot of different things, where we would have to have people pre-download the entire sound walk instead of individual ones. And Rochelle might be able to speak to that because she got stuck with all the technical stuff.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a super expert, but yeah, we tried to troubleshoot. I mean, I don't know, it doesn't deal with your radio and sound walk, but as far as like accessibility, was trying to find ways that everybody accesses material and trying to keep it simple. So we created like specific pages for like a page on a website. It's like, come here and download the whole thing, or come here and stream this particular walk. So there weren't any breaks with instructions right at the very beginning that are like, start the sound walk, and then when it says, okay, wait, stop, and then follow the map. There was like a paper map. There was a map on site. We put markers on the location. Our website has a tracking, like a geolocation. So if you're walking, you can sort of situate yourself on the site. But I don't know. It's a tough one. I think it just requires the willingness of people to participate. I mean, they're in or they're not. We had a lot of luck though with the launches, with people coming in groups and listening together with speakers, which isn't always as effective because you always want someone to have the headphones in for the full immersive experience. But sometimes it's they get them excited and then they share that forward, and then someone else comes in and tries it afterwards.
My question, many of you have made radio programs. Some of you have been involved in making podcasts, and now some of you are involved in making sound walks. I mean, clearly what we're trying to do in Walk, Listen, Create and with Soundwalk September is to broaden the audience and trying to get people to get more involved in both listening to, consuming and walking and making this stuff. What suggestions have you got? What things have you encountered? So anyway, I'd like to find out. We got expert makers and creators and producers and commissioners. You're all in the room. Come on, then. How are we gonna make it more discoverable? Diane, have first go at it.
Yeah, no, discoverable. I'm really interested to hear that. I just want to say that quite a few sound engineers established in the business have a big thing against binaural sound. I have taken my binaural sounds to more enlightened producers like Peregrine Andrews in London. Binaural sound, usually it sounds best with headphones, but it can sound fine over speakers. The only thing you can't do with it is you can't mix both channels down to a mono track. So if you need a mono track for some outlet, just use either the left or the right channel. But, a lot of established sound engineers say, oh, binaural stereo is just a gimmick. Don't let people talk you out of using it if you feel it's the right thing for you, is what I would say. And I just wanted to chip in there, and I'm really fascinated to hear what people think about discoverability.
I'll chip in. I want to hand over because I do want to hear. I would like to hear from Kathy again about this. But so I wonder whether there'll be. That's interesting about the iWatch. I wonder whether there'll be. I'm quite interested in the idea of like site-specific music. So I've always got music in the pieces I've made. I love the idea of there being a kind of a performance that you can only hear by going to a particular place. And in a way, I'm kind of surprised. Maybe it's been done, but maybe it hasn't been had. Maybe there needs to be. Maybe there could be some kind of breakthrough thing that's produced by a big artist. I don't know, like some big stadium-filling artist, and they make. I think this is what's going to happen eventually. Is they're going to make an album, a performance that requires a pilgrimage to somewhere where you can only hear it when you go to that one place. Like, obviously people will rip it off and share the audio, I suppose. But I just imagine something like that would maybe get people alert to. Now, maybe that's something like that's happened and I'm just not aware of it. It's quite possible. But I just wonder, it needs some, Okay, fine.
Gareth Fry has worked a lot with binaural, and he's done a whole theatre performance, I believe, where the whole audience wore headphones, and the actors, I can't remember if the actors were actually mic'd binaurally or if this was my binaural mics on stage. I mean, theatre isn't nearly as impactful as what you're saying, Ed. What you're saying is a great idea, but some people, you know, like Gareth Fry, have already done a version of what you said.
Okay, I was just, yeah. I'm aware of some bits of theatre as well that use binaural, but I guess I was saying specifically for kind of like the Soundwalk idea, or like geolocated sound. The idea that like something is only accessible by going to a particular place, like, and whether there would be a kind of a breakthrough mainstream hit in the same way that, like, you know, Serial got millions of people listening to podcasts who weren't listening to podcasts before. You know, could something like, what would it take to that's why I want to hear from Kathy. Actually, I would love to hear what Kathy thinks as like such an experienced maker of radio and like an amazing storyteller. Like, what would it take do you think, to get sound walks and like like place specific storytelling like breaking through in that sort of level? I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts, Kathy. Sorry for putting you on the spot again.
No. I have to admit, I feel like I'm going to be exceptionally disappointing, because I'm sort of with Di on this, and that discoverability is not my thing. And also, I think it's this massive problem across all the fields. It's not as if, you know, if you're making a radio documentary, we spend our whole time talking to commissioners who say, well, how is it going to cut through? You know, I just wrote a kids book, and I spent the whole time talking to publishers who said, how is it going to cut through? You know, podcasts, how is it going to cut through? So it feels as if it's right across the board. There is such a deluge of stuff. But I think your idea is brilliant. And I think also just the banding together. It's always seemed as if, you know, exactly what you're doing, you know, band together to sort of elevate the art form. You know, look for the sympathetic journalists, you know, court the journalists, because they are the ones who can kind of get the story out there. You know, look for the angles, give them the stories. They want things to write about. Yeah, so I mean, that's all I've got. I feel like you had a far better idea, actually.
Well, no, you just reminded me of something else, which if people that Chris Brooks made, which it turned out to be quite controversial. But you mentioned journalists and like the possibility of like this as sound as place specific sound as a medium for journalist and a journalistic storytelling. So he did a piece with a journalist called Emily Deming. Called Consent, which tells the story of a sexual assault trial, which like I'd never heard anything like that tackled in, and that, you know, like maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's some more not necessarily like that, but something journalistic that gets people going to a place to hear a story. I don't know.
How about combining some very gripping true crime podcast with a geocaching story? You know, I'd love to work on that. If we can get funding for it, let's get together and pitch it and do it, because that would reach this big community of geocachers. But if it was something like one of the really popular true crime series, it would spread to a much wider audience as well. And there could be content you could only access, you know, incidental materials maybe that you would only get relating to the podcast story if you went to those particular places. That's my suggestion.
Well, I'm just going to pitch in and ask Babak and Head. We talked about someone, I can't remember. It's a Hollywood actor. Who is it? Who's created the audio story across America? Who was it? Sorry,
Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner, yeah.
He is the founder, or at least funder, of platform that's a little bit like Place Cloud, which is ours, but focuses on providing short stories related to places, specifically places that you drive by, and only in the United States. So the idea is that you drive from New York to Boston, and then you drive past a few places that are worth listening stories about too. And so you well, probably not the person who's driving, or maybe the person who's driving if it's on the radio. You can listen to stories of places that you pass by. That's Kevin Costner. I forget the name of the platform, but I can look it up. Hold on.
And I feel like I'm talking on a much smaller scale than what you guys are doing. But as Esther said there in the chat, we promote it all on our social media and so on. But then also we are part of some networks. So for example, we're right beside a large lake here, and we're in a network with a bunch of towns around the lake, and are in the process of trying to talk all of them into getting similar trails in their towns. And the concept being that the initial buy-in is the hardest part, getting the people to actually know what the hell it is we're talking about. But once they've done one and hopefully like it, then ideally they'll go on this lovely trip around the lake and do a whole load of them, or around the lake centres of Ireland, or around the lake centres of Europe, or so on and so forth. But that these linking to all these people outside of your community, sorry, in our community, but linking them all up together, that once you've done one, then you're more likely to follow on and try and do other ones.
Yeah, I mean, something that Ed and Dawn sent me they sent me some prompts, and they said one of the things they wanted to talk about, and I said that Diane also had mentioned this, that she may be talking about it next week in her cafe. What was, you spend a huge amount of time, effort, and creative genius to put these things together. And then, it's listened to by hundreds, if that, sometimes only by scores. So what is it that keeps you making this stuff? And how do we encourage more people to make this stuff when really the recompense is going to be very small? Oh, you've gone all silent. Everyone's
Who's that for? Who's that one?
That's for anyone in the room.
Time for a clip, quick.
That's probably exactly the right answer. Time for a clip. Like for me, it's always the connections and the collaborations and the feeling that one person has, you can say that all you want. One person has really been moved by it. And I've received some feedback, and especially the people I've worked with, like each of the students that I got to work with. I mean, having nothing to do with me, because it was a full team effort. The relationships they made, the connections that happened through the process of this always makes it worth it for me. Like, even I mentioned to Ed that there was a fourth student for Kad Prakash that, she was lovely working on this piece, and I have no regrets that, she didn't finish it. It was still well worth it for her. There's no product involved, but the process of creating it with her has led to lots of different things in the world. So for me, I as long as there's enough funding that I can keep going, I will always make this work. But yeah, it's nicer to have more people. It is hard because now when I'm getting my higher paying jobs, I make 3-minute clips. It's a big investment to ask someone to spend an hour and walk through a forest. It's hard to get people to do that. I mean, with the Lays project, you already have a real interest. It's more of a tourism. Also, you have that, but I don't really have that. A lot of people are thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not going to go into the forest and hear about someone's depression. That's just not a big draw in itself, right? So it's a big investment, but I don't know. I don't know what else I could do anyways. I'm not really good at anything else. So it's kind of like, oh, I got stuck with this low paying job, but that's me.
We'll hand over to Dawn and Ed to sort of kind of round us all up. But otherwise, I'd just like to say, thanks to both of you for creating great work, but also inviting quite a few people who've come on this call that we wouldn't have discovered. And those of you who we haven't discovered before, we'd love you to sign up with Walk, Listen, Create. And over to Ed and Dawn.
All right. Go. If you've got something to say, Dawn. Okay, I think I have something to say. Why make these things? There's lots of reasons you might want to make them. Everybody's different. But getting really rich is not one of them. For me, anyway. I don't think I'm not that. I think in a way I'm not really bothered if lots of people hear these things. I think we've just hit the 600 mark on the Headford Lace Trail. I don't think that's like classified commercial information, but we just hit the 600 mark, which
and we're pretty niche, so that's good.
Yeah. So, and I think that's good. I'm really delighted by that. But I'm also sort of, in a way, as long as I can sort of make a bit of a living at it, I don't mind if things are not massive. I quite like. I mean, this is part of the reason you do place-specific stuff, is because it's place-specific. It's like by necessity it has to happen in a small space, and And I live in a small rural community. I'm not in a big city. I'd love to be in a sort of thriving hub of like audio production, but the stuff that I do is like either involves me traveling or doing stuff on my own or occasionally working in teams. Like I have to sort of like create the kind of stuff locally that I can, and but I quite like that. Like I quite like doing stuff that kind of benefits like my community, like what I consider to be my community, like my extended community geographically and things like that. So that for me is a big part of it. It's just getting to sort of build relationships with people who matter to you and build a relationship with a place, you know. That has a lot of value, which makes it the whole thing tremendously more easy than it would be otherwise. So that's my final words. There you go.
Yeah, and I'll just say the same. I was really happy to discover this international community as well, because, you know, I'm in a medium-sized town, and it's great to know that people heard this way over wherever all you are. I mean, that's really, really neat, and that somehow, even though it is location-specific, it resonated anyways. So I like finding the community of people that kind of nerd out on some of this, you know, and it kind of hits all the right buttons for me. I like sound. I like not being at my desk all the time, and this requires you to get up and get out, and that it's easy for me to sit and work at my desk all day, but because I get to do walking art now, I'm out and gathering. And there's so many different forms of it. That's what I like. Like I like hearing how Ed created his, and I'm looking at a lot of your others and a lot of the ecoacoustic work and a lot of the way the medium is moving and changing. So to me, it's just a really fantastic space to be in. And thanks for coming out today. It was great meeting Ed. Ed and I had lots of good laughs, and we just chatted together about preliminary chat. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much to everybody for staying on the chat and chipping in and things like that. This is awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. We'll say a big thank you to Ed and Dawn.